a city's population becomes so small, the burden of monitoring government activities falls on few, and therefore no real protection exists. Cities with small populations may face political instability because there are too few residents to support the government. And this contributes, or can contribute, to corruption, voter fraud, and stalled growth. California already requires a minimum population of 500 registered voters in order for a city to be incorporated. This prerequisite is to ensure that enough people will be able to participate in a democratic process upon the creation of a city. A strong, active, and independent electorate is the foundation of any democratic government. In one California city, there is no democratic government because there are no independent electorate. The city of Vernon had a population of 96 residents in 2010. It has 67 registered voters, and about 30 people voted in the last election that the city, in fact, held. From 1980 to 2006, there were no elections held in the city of Vernon, from 1980 to 2006. Most of the city's housing is controlled by the city itself. In fact, all but 4 residents are controlled by the city itself. They are populated with employees of the city, family members of city leaders, business associations, and private employees of city leaders. There is no independent electorate to be heard from. And in fact, the city charter forbids civil service protection for its city workers, so there's not even an independent check from its workforce. Turnover in the council is virtually non-existent. As I said, no elections from 1980 to 2006. In 2006, there was an election because a handful of people moved into the city, established residents, registered to vote, declared themselves as candidates, and began to campaign. The city's response was to hire private investigators to chase them around, condemn their housing, refuse to count ballots, and accuse the candidates of voter fraud. In the end, they hired an outside firm to count the ballots, and the incumbents all won re-election, as you would expect, because of the lack of independent electorate. And in the end, 3 people were indicted on voter fraud. The mayor, who had been mayor for 50 years, his wife, and his son. But this wasn't the first time in which there had been indictments and cases of fraud and other activity in the city. In fact, voting fraud cases go back to 1944, and corruption charges as recent as October as last year with the last city administrator. After the 2006 incident, the mayor stepped down, as did the city administrator, as they awaited trial. In the end, the city administrator began to collect his pension as he awaited his case moving forward. A pension of $509,664.60 a year, over $42,000 a month, a public employee pension, because he asserted that he had worked 6 jobs while he was city administrator and cobbled together a combination of those pensions. The city council, in addition to receiving roughly $60,000 a year for its part-time service, has medical reimbursements that in some cases go as high as $112,000 a year above and beyond their full medical coverage. Recently, the LA Times had a front page story about nepotism in the city. In any other city in this state, there'd be a popular uprising from the electorate, calling for reform, calling for a recall, calling for change. It didn't happen here. And the reason it didn't happen is because, again, there is no independent electorate. So the issue comes before the legislature to figure out the best way to resolve the underlying problems. We, as a legislature, have weighed in on other issues of local corruption. We passed a series of bills last year in response to problems that we saw in Bell and other cities. It was a combination of our action and the local action by the voters in that city where there is an independent electorate. Here, there is no independent electorate to be heard from. The question falls squarely on our shoulders. We have pursued this legislation and in the process heard very real concerns from the business community about the impact of disincorporation on their businesses. Well, Vernon has a very small population. They have a very large workforce, anywhere from 35 to 50,000 people that work there. It truly is part of a powerful economic engine in Southern California, and the business community has raised valid questions about the impacts of disincorporation on their ability to continue to operate and to create the economic activity that they do. And so we have sought to be responsive to that and speak to those in 781, which will be before us in 2 weeks. In 781, we address all the issues that have been raised by the business community. When I say we address them, I'm not saying that we've reached resolution where there's agreement yet, but we've started the process that outlines specific ways in which to respond to each of the concerns that they've raised, and I'd be happy to go into that in detail when 781 is before us in 2 weeks. But the question before us now is how we deal with this unprecedented level of corruption and the absence of an independent electorate to bring reforms on their own behalf. This bill has broad-based support from the County of Los Angeles, the Sheriff of Los Angeles, Common Cause, the Coalition for Clean Air, the Latino Business Chamber of Los Angeles, the National Association of Women Business Owners, many community, civic, and religious organizations, neighboring communities. The mayors of the neighboring communities have all come together and supported this as well. And we have received a broad bipartisan support in the Assembly and broad support here in the Senate with numerous co-authors.